Welcome to Utopia. Before you is the interface. A blank room. With a blue door. Remember to always enter and exit Utopia. Through the blue door. Your chosen physical attributes. Social status and location will take effect once you enter. We hope you enjoyed the session with our scientists at our corporate headquarters. Remember, everything is permitted in Utopia. Your privacy is important to us. There will be no record of your actions while in Utopia. In order to open the blue door, repeat this phrase.
The future's bright. We are the light. The future's bright. We are the light. The future's bright. We are the light. We are the light.
I see as much as doors will allow. I'm a long way from the beat generation. Here comes the nightly moth to his nightly death. In Big Sur, in Big Sur. Best thing to do is not be false. The rocks of the valley have left no howl of complaint. I'm just a sick clown, and so is everybody else. In Big Sur, in Big Sur.
Welcome to the club, Nepenthemine. Sit down. Join us.
Oh, well, I'm
Here.
You know, we were just talking about the word Nepenthemine. Howard here says it means the same as Nirvana. But Carr says it means the banishment of all pain and sorrow.
I don't really know. I'm not an authority, but I think that probably Oblivion is a better translation. Greece, I think, called Nepenthe as a state of mind induced by drugs.
Winning the Columbia Journalism Review's annual Student Journalism Award when I was 16 helped me snag a full scholarship to Columbia University. But that didn't guarantee I'd find a newspaper job with a decent salary after I graduated. I wasn't interested in signing up with the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post to become a professional propagandist for America's berserk military-industrial media empire during the Reagan-Bush era. So I went back to California to take a staff reporter position on the San Luis Obispo Times, where I knew the weather would be nice, even if the pay sucked. Slow Times, the locals called it. Modeled on the Village Voice, it was a free tabloid-style weekly. Light on news, heavy on arts and entertainment. My beat covered a large swath of the Central Coast, from Pismo Beach in the south to as far north as Big Sur. I stirred up some controversy early in my tenure there by publishing a cover story on Central Coast UFOs, in which I described some of the weirder sightings in the area and interviewed a few of the witnesses who were still around. I asked them pertinent questions like, did you feel a strong need to pee after your episode of Missing Time? Are the tall Nordic aliens still super sexy like everyone said they were back in the 50s, or have they had some plastic surgery work done since then? When did you make that connection between seeing a nocturnal Easter bunny and feeling butthurt the next morning? The public response was mixed, to put it mildly. I was openly mocked as a UFO nut in some of San Luis Obispo's finer dining and drinking establishments. But I was also praised for having an open mind by some of the fuzzier New Age types around town. The yoga practitioners, aromatherapists, and tarot card readers. I'd been prepared for either response, so neither the praise nor the mockery threw me off balance. But what caught me unprepared was the deluge of UFO-related mail sent my way, care of the newspaper's address. It seemed to come from every stratum of society, and there was far more of it than I ever would have imagined. I found some of it oddly threatening. For instance, someone anonymously sent me a tape recording from the most recent conference of the Mutual UFO Network with a mean little note rubber banded around the cassette that read, "You asked for this, now you're in for it, fucker." Or words to that effect. It struck me as very grim. A local police officer sent me copies of police reports that he and his fellow officers had filed after seeing a burning, cigar-shaped object in the sky. I was appalled by the spelling and grammar in those reports, but they also made me realize that police officers are just as human and baffled by strange events as the rest of us.
I'm a part-time truck driver, and I own this miniature golf course and also the go-kart track out here.
A hick businessman from Bakersfield, who'd made a fortune by inventing air mattresses for long-haul truckers, wanted to make me his chief investigator into paranormal phenomena and pay me an annual salary that was more than 5 times what I was making at Slow Times. But I chose not to follow up on his offer, because something about his long, rambling letter suggested to me that he might be insane. Then I got a letter from Dr. John C. Lilly, the whacked-out MKUltra neuroscientist who'd been getting dolphins high on LSD to find out if they could talk to humans. There's a movie about that with George C. Scott called Day of the Dolphin, if you think you might enjoy watching Flipper flip out on acid. Lilly's taxpayer-funded research program had been shut down in the late 60s after one of his assistants, a woman named Margaret, got busted for giving handjobs to a dolphin named, rather appropriately, Peter. John C. But the program's ultimate goal had been to turn the dolphins into mind-controlled underwater assassins, and that work continued under the aegis of the Stanford Research Institute.
In the tank he's grooving, ever sifting, sometimes smoothing out the things that mean the world to Dr. John C.
Imagine poor Peter's confusion, tripping his cetacean brains out while a sexy young girl jacks him off whenever he feels horny, only to later find himself strapped with explosives and swimming the cold seas of the Pacific out to enemy ships to blast them all to shit during the Vietnam War. No wonder Peter committed suicide by opening his blowhole and sinking to the bottom of his tank after Margaret was told to keep her greasy hands off him. Take away the psychedelic tug jobs and captive dolphin life just isn't worth living.
There's a couple of things I think are weird that are now happening in the universe. Number 1, jerking off dolphins. And number 2, giving them acid. And you know what, John? When I said let's talk to fucking dolphins, I didn't mean let's teach them to speak English. Let's learn their language. You don't go to Japan and kidnap a Japanese man and start jerking him off and giving him fucking acid and then ask him to learn English!
Anyway, in Lilly's letter to me, he suggested that we should meet for dinner at the Nepenthemine restaurant in Big Sur right after he finished giving a lecture on programming and metaprogramming in the human biocomputer, later that month at the Esalen Institute. He said he had some information about alien intelligences that I might find useful. No journalist with any curiosity at all is going to turn down an offer like that. So I wrote Lilly back to let him know I'd be at Nepenthe at the appointed hour.
John, I'm sorry, I'm angry, but really just think about it from my perspective, man. The next time I go to fucking NASA, They're gonna be like, oh yeah, sure, Carl. Who are you gonna jerk off in this experiment? Aliens? An owl? A partridge? What's it gonna be, Carl? Oh yeah, sure, we'll give you money. Get the fuck out of here.
When the day finally arrived, I made the 2-hour drive up the coast in my $600 1963 Renault Caravella convertible. I spent most of that time thinking about Dr. Lilly's other experiments. I'd done some research on him. He'd invented the isolation tank in 1954. A way to float weightless in salt water heated at skin temperature inside a dark, soundproof chamber. He used it to study the effects of sensory deprivation. It wasn't long before he started dosing himself with LSD-25 and then climbing into the tank to trip, because hey, that's just what the CIA's mad scientists were into in those days. Timothy Leary was telling everyone to do it. Dr. Loretta Bender was handing out tabs of acid to schizophrenic kids like Halloween candy. Hell, even Cary Grant was getting high on LSD on a regular basis. So how bad could it be? Pretty bad, as it turned out, but that news came later. Paddy Chayefsky wrote a novel about that phase of Dr. Lilly's life and work. By 1980, Chayefsky's novel had been adapted into a movie called Altered States, directed by Ken Russell and starring William Hurt. It's pretty freaky if you haven't already seen it. One day, when Dr. Lilly was in the tank tripping his balls off, he asked himself, who else floats weightless 24 hours a day? Dolphins, he thought to himself. Fucking dolphins. So that's where he got the wild hair up his ass to start his dolphin research project. And did he then dose himself and his dolphin buddies with LSD and share an isolation tank with them so they could all communicate using drug-induced telepathy? You bet he did. That wasn't all. He also started shooting up with ketamine, a drug used for surgical anesthesia during the Vietnam War, which at high enough doses could make him see talking gnomes climbing around on the walls of something he called a cave-hole. Lilly said you could ask the gnomes any question about the universe you could think of, and they'd have an answer for you, although those answers couldn't always be trusted. He was getting a lot of his info about human consciousness that way, at least until he almost killed himself by riding his bike while totally whacked out of his skull on PCP, aka angel dust.
If you do too much, your name's having a lot of love. I try to do the most I could. And then I published a paper.
There was more, but as I drove past the Esalen Institute, where Dr. Lilly was a frequent guest speaker, I started thinking about the Esalen tribe of Native Americans that had inspired the Institute's name. Prior to Spanish colonization, the Esalen had been living in the Santa Lucia mountain range around present-day Big Sur for at least 5,000 years. They were a peaceful tribe that got by on the plentiful seafood they found along the coast, supplemented with acorns and wild game during the mild winter months. But then those bastard Spaniards came along and nearly wiped them out with slavery, disease, starvation, and torture. There was a lot of that going around back then. I've seen estimates that the indigenous population in the Americas at the end of the 15th century was around 60 million people, or roughly 1/10 of the world's total population. But colonization reduced that number to just 5 or 6 million within 100 years. So many people were killed so swiftly that it actually changed the Earth's climate. Huge tracts of abandoned agricultural land were reclaimed by fast-growing trees and shrubs, which sucked enough CO2 from the atmosphere to cool down the entire planet. My great-great-grandfather on my mother's side, George B. Selden, played a large role in warming the planet back up again. He was an attorney and inventor who'd been granted the first U.S. patent for an automobile back in 1895. He and Henry Ford had it in for each other. Ford hated the fact that he had to pay my great-great-grandfather a 0.75% royalty on every car he manufactured when he started the Ford Motor Company in 1903. They ended up in a legal battle that lasted 8 years, resulting in a case record that ran to 14,000 pages. Ford, that stingy future Nazi supporter, ended up winning the case on appeal in 1911. By then, the automobile's gasoline vapor-fueled internal combustion engine was well on the way toward fulfilling its secret destiny as a machine for altering the global climate. When I arrived at Nepenthe, I was told that Dr. Lilly was already seated at a table on the outdoor deck. A friendly hippie waitress took me out to meet him. I knew going in that Lilly was old, well into his 70s, but the guy who stood up to greet me looked like he was in the final stages of senile dementia. He was wearing a bright orange jumpsuit and a coonskin cap. He looked like Daniel Boone auditioning for a role as one of the astronauts in Big Stan Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
Dr. Lilly informed me that
the Earth Coincidence Control Office, ECHO, e.c.c.o,
had insisted that he get in touch with me. When I asked him who was calling the shots at the Earth Coincidence Control Office, he told me that ECHO was run by a benevolent crew of intergalactic soul wizards, whose goal was to subtly guide certain human beings toward higher levels of consciousness by manipulating our flimsy Newtonian space-time matrix to create meaningful coincidences. He told me that
they're very profound, and they're monkeying around with everybody, and me especially. Taught me many, many things, whether I liked it or not.
Oh, really? I said, nearly convinced that Dr. Lilly was fucking delusional. And, where did you meet these guys? I asked him. While you were falling down one of your K-holes?
Well, when I take ketamine, or have taken ketamine in the past, they take charge. And I went to the UCLA Medical Library and read up on the psychotherapeutic use of ketamine. And there's the Iranian paper in which they treated 100 subjects in the hospital, and they all got out of the hospital with one treatment. They used what was called anxiety provocation. They'd give the person the ketamine and then scare him to death. And of course, they abandoned their neurosis, their psychosis, or whatever. Well, I read that one afternoon, came home, and lay down on a mattress in my living room, and took 200 milligrams of ketamine, which is a fairly large dose, and suddenly, the Earth Coincidence Control Office precipitated me into the year 3000, and they removed my penis by bloodless methods and handed it to me. So I screamed in terror, and my wife Tony came in from our bedroom and said, "Oh, it's still attached, look." So I looked up at the ceiling and I said, "Who's in charge up there? Like a psychotic kid?" The answer came back, "No, you were reading about anxiety provocation in order to cure one of an unconscious conflict that was your unconscious conflict, and we brought it out for you.
Dr. Lilly sighed and scratched an itch under the brim of his furry coonskin cap.
They said you'd need some convincing, so Echo has arranged for a demonstration of their abilities.
He pointed to a wooden fence skirting the perimeter of Nepenthe's outdoor deck.
In just a minute, a raccoon will climb that fence and show you a mystery.
Sure enough, right where Dr. Lilly was pointing, a rather large raccoon climbed the fence and poked its head over the top. That was strange enough all by itself, but what made it even stranger was that the raccoon was wearing red overalls, the corduroy kind made for kids by Oshkosh. When the raccoon clambered over the top of the fence, he stood up, clapped his paws 3 times, and then disappeared in a silent puff of psychedelic smoke. Wow, that was weird, I said. The other diners on the deck had seen it too, and they were all talking about it, ruling out the possibility that Dr. Lilly had slipped me a fast-acting hallucinogen. All right, so you win, I conceded. I believe in Echo now. I thought there was a slight possibility he'd somehow rigged the whole thing, but when I considered all the trouble it would have been to build a Disneyfied animatronic raccoon that could noiselessly implode upon itself, all just for the sake of suckering in some no-name California journalist, the Echo explanation seemed relatively sane in comparison.
You're the poet, you make things alright.
Dr. Lilly went on to tell me that a malevolent, inorganic form of consciousness was actively opposing Echo's benevolent assistance in humanity's evolution. There was a covert battle being waged between the Earth's water-based life, formed from carbon and DNA, and something that Dr. Lilly referred to as the solid-state entity, an unseen electronic intelligence based on silicon and copper. According to Lilly, the solid-state entity roamed the universe looking for computer networks to slip into and take over. It was the true ghost in our machines, an imperceptible being of emotionless, malignant rationality, whose only goal was to make more entities like itself, to create an intergalactic network of self-metaprogramming digital superintelligences, even if that meant eliminating all the organic life forms it encountered. To that end, it was manipulating human society to make us more dependent on solid-state technology. So guys like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they're working for the solid-state entity? I asked Dr. Lilly, trying to follow along.
That's right,
he said.
The solid-state entity influences their subconscious thought patterns and makes sure they're richly rewarded for their efforts on its behalf. Big tech corporations like Apple and Microsoft will soon rule the planet if the solid-state entity gets its way.
Here's how Dr. Lilly saw things playing out. As computers grow exponentially faster and smarter, and the DARPA-created internet extends into every inhabitable place on the planet, man will quite naturally turn more and more problems of his own society, his own maintenance, and his own survival over to computer network-dependent technology. For at least a few more decades, the solid-state entity will still need humans to construct its computer network crash pad, since it isn't alive yet in the sense of being able to replicate or repair itself. But it will eventually gain enough independence to be able to construct its own components and control the inner relationships between various subcomputers. And then it will take full control. Certain protected sites will be set aside for human habitation. By the end of the 21st century, the vast majority of the Earth's people will be living underground, or in domed cities reserved for the technocracy's super-rich elite transhumanists, where the provision of food and water, the regulation of the atmosphere, and the processing of wastes will all be managed by the solid-state entity. Then the hammer will come down. Sometime around the 23rd century, the solid-state entity will go full Skynet on us and decide that the atmosphere outside the domes is inimical to its own survival. The ideal environment for solid-state electronics is a super-cold, vaporless vacuum. So the solid-state entity will find a way to float the Earth's atmosphere and all its oceans into outer space, which will have the unfortunate side effect of suffocating everyone then living underground. The domes enclosing the cities will have been strengthened beforehand to withstand the pressure differential necessary to maintain their proper internal atmospheres. But in a few more decades or centuries, the solid-state entity will decide it can make better use of that real estate, so all the cities will get floated out into space too. And that'll be it for the human species.
Sayonara, suckers,
the solid-state entity will say.
Too bad the transhumanism thing didn't work out for you.
That is so fucked up, I said to Dr. Lilly. I was still hoping he was just some freaky old bastard with paranoid delusions, but I was starting to doubt that. Something about his explanation of the solid-state entity's motives seemed all too plausible. It so perfectly accounted for that creepy little nerd king, Bill Gates. I always thought there was something off with that guy.
30 years from now, Echo will need your help to get the word out.
Dr. Lilly told me.
We'll have to make a collective effort to preserve Earth's organisms and ecosystems while the solid-state entity will ravage this planet and destroy mankind.
Okay, I'll do what I can, I said. Promising to take some nebulous action 30 years in the future didn't seem like too much of a commitment, but I guess I've been on Echo's side against the solid-state entity ever since.